It is the penultimate final boss of Medarot Navi, the combined celestial fossil type, KOL00 Suicide. With a kit of zero gravity, sword, needle guard, multi-legs, and the leg ability of high fly, which buffs all leg stats by 30%, but in trade takes 2.5 times more damage from gravity skills as long as the legs are equipped. Now, as a recurring model from the days of Medarot Navi, this is one that we actually thought way back when we first had Arc 3 of the story that we'd see make their official grand return, but instead got Dead Quasar instead, which none of us are certainly complaining over. But Zero Suicide in particular is a model anyone who's played Navi knows and loves, and fears no less, for its immense power on the battlefield, and just the number of times that you fight it through the course of the game in its later end game makes it so much more of a threat to be had. Medarot S, with its grand return, is most certainly no exception to this rule either. Zero Gravity on the head is a brand new skill being introduced into the game, and only fitting for a celestial fossil type like this one, but explained briefly, upon attacking the target and it's successfully inflicting the ailment on them, it will change their leg bonus to D rank. No matter what kind of bonus they had before, whatever it was, it is now D rank, which, explained briefly, is a minus 20% debuff to all leg stats, since they are on terrible terrain they have no compatibility with. Now, I believe it was also mentioned that it will nullify leg abilities, but that's kind of a big what if, and I may have misread that. But even just changing the leg bonus to D rank alone is enough to make it a very imposing and incredibly messy ailment to fear with on the field. Because in a game where speed is key, if you are not A rank or better, you may as well not even bother fighting because they can and will outrun you. Right Arm of Sword is a conventional melee skill you really can't ever go wrong with using for its incredible balance across the board, so no major advantages, no cooldown penalties. You can use it anywhere and never see any drop or lack of consistency in its performance. However, it is worth noting that at the cost of having over 2k base power, he is rather blind and just a little on the slower end too, with heat and cool stats just barely floating around the 400 mark, and success at barely 600 on top of that. So a little caution is advised if you are going to use that sword for its high power. Needle Guard on the left arm is a relatively new defense skill, but it has started making its rounds more and more recently. But explaining it briefly, upon use, it will force Zero Suicide on the center line, where he will intercept any incoming ailment-based targets. And upon being attacked with an ailment-based attack, bug, virus, freeze, whatever it is, he will instead reflect the ailment back on the attacker in an Uno reverse no you type of situation. Now, at the cost of being able to reflect ailments like this, as nasty as that is, Needle Guard only has one charge when used, so exercise just a little bit of caution if you are going to make use of that to capitalize on anyone that is using ailment fires to keep everyone else at bay. Multi-ped legs means that Zero Suicide will have pretty solid coverage across most terrains, as multi-ped have one of the next best all-round leg types compared under biped in terms of terrain matching, and the leg ability of high fly makes its already relatively bulky looking stats even more bulkier and nastier to be held once the high fly leg ability comes into effect. Now, just to explain high fly again briefly, it will buff them all by 30% at the cost of taking more damage from gravity skills. Now, that means that 781 for base mobility, while still fair and par for the course for multi-ped legs, will actually go up even more so than it would be before any other bonuses once it officially hits the field. Now, this is also not including any kind of terrain bonuses, no Medarot bonuses, no nothing, but just taking that extra 30% at face value, that 781 will now put Zero Suicide at over 1,000 base mobility before any other modifiers come into effect. Now, while his mobility his evade at 452 really won't go that much higher at about 600 capped, his melee resist at 1841 and his shoot resist at 1432 will very easily cap over, if not close to, over 2,000 upon use of that extra 30%. Which means if he wasn't already bulky enough, he's absolutely going to be packing the armor and the bulk. And on the topic of armor, he is packing a very healthy 20,000 HP spread across all parts. 6,000 for the head, 4,500 for the right arm, 5k for the left arm, and 5100 for the legs. So he's not only bulky and can get bulkier, but he's also very healthy with an HP pool as well. All this being said, though, as a pure set score, I still do have to rate Zero Suicide a pretty solid 7.5 out of 10. Despite the rather mixed range of what he brings to the board between Zero Gravity as an ailment skill, Needle Guard for ailment reflect, and Sword for conventional combat, he actually synergizes with himself decently well, and he can fit a pretty large number of roles as an auxiliary or primary melee fighter on the field, depending on where you have to put him. The only really big weaknesses to be careful of is the fact that Zero Suicide, in trade of being rather bulky and pretty speedy on top of that, he's basically blind. As you see there with his success stats at barely 800 for the head and barely 600 for the right arm, as I said earlier, and heat stats no higher than 500 on everything except the head, he's not going to be the fastest in terms of charging things on the field, and he's going to be relying pretty heavily on high fly to keep himself going at a very good speed. Now, it is also worth noting that because he is packing the weight at triple heavy, he already is subject to the heavy weakness on top of that from break hammer, break rush, and so on. But because of high fly, that's going to be even more so the case. And that does mean that if you are going to use Zero Suicide at all, you need to make sure going in that the enemy does not whatsoever have gravity effects on their side, because the first move that hits him is guaranteed to kill him. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. As mixed parts, on the other hand, I do have to rate him very equally at a 7.5 out of 10 as well, primarily for the reasons mentioned, that he can be his parts are very bulky, very solid base power between his head and arm as well, and his leg stats can be truly monstrous and impressive once he hits the field before any other modifiers, and Needle Guard has very solid use too. But I do also recommend exercising caution if you are going to use the legs, primarily for the fact that with those extra stats comes extra weakness if you are going to use someone that's packing the weight.